dawn. A rural road outside Sales, Louisiana. The sky is pale. The air is still. Birds call from the pines. A 1934 Ford V8 sedan idles on the side of the road, stolen like all the others. Inside, 2 people. Waiting. They have been running for years. Across Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, sleeping in stolen cars, eating cold food, moving constantly. They are exhausted, hunted, doomed. The engine hums. The road is empty. Then, from the tree line, movement. 6 lawmen, positioned in the brush, rifles raised, waiting. One of them signals, and the world explodes. Gunfire. Not a few shots, not a warning. A sustained barrage. The car rocks. Glass shatters. Metal tears. The sound is deafening. It lasts 15 seconds, maybe 20. Then silence. The birds do not return. Smoke drifts. The smell of gunpowder hangs in the air. The lawmen step forward, weapons still raised. Inside the car, 2 bodies, unrecognizable. This is how the legend of Bonnie and Clyde ended. Not in a blaze of glory. Not in a dramatic shootout. In an ambush. On a back road. In Louisiana. They never saw it coming. And for the 13 people they killed, there had been no warning either. Dallas in the early 1930s was a city in crisis. The Great Depression had gutted the economy. Banks failed. Businesses closed. Unemployment soared. In West Dallas, a poor neighborhood across the Trinity River, conditions were especially grim. Families lived in shacks and tents. There was no running water, no sewage system, no paved streets. Children went hungry. Adults scrambled for work that did not exist. This was not romantic poverty. This was grinding, dehumanizing deprivation. Crime was not an aberration. It was a survival strategy. Petty theft, bootlegging, robbery. For some young men in West Dallas, prison was inevitable. The only question was when. The Barrow family lived in West Dallas. Henry and Cumie Barrow had migrated from rural Texas, seeking work in the city. They had 7 children. Clyde Chestnut Barrow was the 5th, born March 24th, 1909. The family was poor. Henry worked odd jobs, sometimes as a sharecropper, sometimes as a laborer. The children contributed whatever they could. Clyde was small, wiry, restless. He dropped out of school. He worked briefly in a glass factory, then a garage. But by his late teens, he had turned to crime. Not because he was evil, not because he was rebelling. Because crime paid and honest work did not. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was born October 1st, 1910, in Rowena, Texas, a small town west of Dallas. Her father died when she was 4. Her mother, Emma, moved the family to West Dallas to find work. Bonnie was bright, creative, and ambitious. She loved poetry, theater, and movies. She wrote constantly, poems, stories, songs. She dreamed of escaping West Dallas, of becoming someone. She married at 16, a boy named Roy Thornton. The marriage failed. Thornton was imprisoned for robbery. 1929. Bonnie worked as a waitress. She lived with her mother. She was 19 years old, bored and trapped. Then she met Clyde Barrow. Clyde Barrow's criminal career began with small-time theft. In 1926, at age 17, he was arrested for auto theft. He was not prosecuted. In 1928, he was arrested again, burglary, released. In 1929, he and his brother Buck began robbing small businesses, gas stations, stores, lunchrooms. The crimes were opportunistic, poorly planned, low yield. Clyde was not a mastermind. He was a desperate young man with no prospects. But he was also reckless, and recklessness has consequences. In 1930, Clyde was arrested for burglary and auto theft. He was sentenced to 14 years at Eastham Prison Farm, one of the most brutal facilities in Texas. Eastham was hell. Prisoners worked in the fields under armed guards. They were beaten, starved, and subjected to sexual violence. Escape attempts were met with execution. Clyde was physically small and vulnerable. He was raped repeatedly by another inmate, a man named Ed Crowder. In desperation, Clyde killed him, an act that prison officials quietly ignored. The murder was never prosecuted. Prison officials considered it an internal matter, but Clyde was broken. To avoid further abuse and forced labor, he convinced a fellow inmate to chop off 2 of his toes with an axe. He was released shortly afterward in February 1932 on parole. He left Eastham permanently damaged, physically, psychologically, and morally. Prison had not rehabilitated him. It had radicalized him. Clyde Barrow emerged with one conviction. He would never go back, and he would kill anyone who tried to take him. Bonnie Parker met Clyde Barrow in January 1930 at a friend's house in West Dallas. Clyde was charming, intense, dangerous. Bonnie was bored, lonely, yearning for something more. They spent a few weeks together before Clyde was arrested and sent to Eastham. Bonnie visited him in prison. She smuggled him a gun. He used it to escape, briefly. He was recaptured and sent back, but Bonnie waited. When Clyde was paroled in 1932, Bonnie was there, and she made a choice. Bonnie Parker was not kidnapped. She was not coerced. She chose to join Clyde Barrow. Why? The reasons are complex and unknowable. Perhaps she loved him. Perhaps she craved the excitement. Perhaps she believed the life would be short and preferred a dramatic end to a slow fade in West Dallas. Perhaps she believed Clyde's promises that they would stop soon, go straight, live quietly. But the life she chose was not glamorous. It was sleeping in stolen cars, eating canned beans, constantly moving, never safe, always running, and it was violent. Bonnie Parker was not a shooter. There's no confirmed evidence that Bonnie Parker personally killed anyone. Forensic evidence and eyewitness testimony confirmed this, but she was complicit. She drove getaway cars. She scouted locations. She carried, but it became the narrative. Bonnie Parker understood myth-making. She participated in it, but the myth did not protect her. It only ensured she would be remembered. The Barrow Gang was not a criminal organization. It was a loose, unstable collection of desperate people. At various times, members included Clyde Barrow, Bonnie Parker, Clyde's brother, Buck Barrow, Buck's wife, Blanche Barrow, Raymond Hamilton, W.D. Jones, Henry Methvin. They were young, most in their early 20s. They were broke. They were running. They lived in constant fear of lawmen, of betrayal, of each other. The Barrow Gang's crimes escalated rapidly. Early robberies were small. Gas stations, grocery, stores. The take was rarely more than a few $100s. But in 1932 and 1933, the violence intensified. On August 5th, 1932, the gang attempted to rob a store in Atoka, Oklahoma. Clyde killed Sheriff C.G. Maxwell and Deputy Eugene Moore. On January 6, 1933, Clyde killed Deputy Malcolm Davis in West Dallas. On April 13, 1933, the gang killed 2 highway patrolmen, H.D. Murphy and Edward Bryant Wheeler, near Grapevine, Texas. On June 23, 1933, the gang killed Town Marshal Henry Humphrey in Alma, Arkansas. These were not defensive shootings. They were executions. Clyde Barrow killed lawmen because he had promised himself he would never be taken alive, and anyone who tried to arrest him was a threat. The gang also killed and wounded civilians. In Hillsboro, Texas, a 60-year-old butcher named Howard Hall was shot and killed during a robbery. In Temple, Texas, a 63-year-old grocer named John Bucher was killed. In Joplin, Missouri, the gang killed 2 police officers during a shootout at their hideout. Dozens of others were wounded, bystanders, store clerks, people in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Barrow Gang was not robbing the rich to feed the poor. They were killing working people for pocket change. Inside the gang, paranoia was constant. Members suspected each other of planning to turn informant. Arguments erupted. Guns were drawn. Blanche Barrow, Buck's wife, was terrified. She begged Buck to leave. He refused. In July 1933, Buck Barrow was shot in the head during a shootout in Platte City, Missouri. He died days later. Blanche was captured. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The gang was shrinking. Death and capture were inevitable. The Barrow Gang became famous because of the media. Newspapers across the country published stories about their exploits. Headlines framed them as public enemies, desperados, lovers on the run. Photographs, some taken by the gang themselves, found after raids on their hideouts, circulated widely. One image in particular became iconic. Bonnie Parker, posing with a cigar in her mouth, a gun on her hip, one foot on a car bumper. The photo was staged. Bonnie did not smoke cigars, but the image sold newspapers, and it created a myth. The gap between image and reality. The media portrayed Bonnie and Clyde as glamorous outlaws, modern-day Robin Hoods, rebelling against a system that had failed them. The reality was uglier. They were not rebelling. They were surviving, barely. They were not heroes. They were killers. And they were not romantics. They were exhausted, paranoid, and dying slowly from infections and injuries sustained in shootouts. But the myth took hold. And it endures. In February 1934, former Texas Ranger Frank Hamer was brought out of retirement to lead the hunt for Bonnie and Clyde. Hamer was 50 years old, a legendary lawman with a reputation for ruthlessness and effectiveness. He had been involved in numerous deadly confrontations. He did not believe in trials. He believed in elimination. Texas Governor Miriam Ma Ferguson and the Texas Department of Corrections authorized Hamer to pursue the gang by any means necessary. Hamer accepted. He studied the gang's patterns. He mapped their movements. He identified their associates and safe houses. He did not intend to arrest Bonnie and Clyde. He intended to kill them. Hamer worked with lawmen in Louisiana, Missouri, and Oklahoma. He coordinated with local sheriffs, federal agents, and highway patrol officers. By spring 1934, the net was closing. The break came from Henry Methvin, a gang member. Methvin's father, Ivan Methvin, negotiated a deal with Texas and Louisiana authorities. Immunity for Henry in exchange for information. Ivan Methvin agreed to set a trap. He would arrange for Bonnie and Clyde to meet Henry on a specific road in Louisiana, and lawmen would be waiting. On the morning of May 23, 1934, Frank Hamer and 5 other lawmen took positions along Highway 154 near Sales, Louisiana. The posse included Frank Hamer, Texas; Manny Galt, Texas; Bob Alcorn, Texas; Ted Hinton, Texas; Prentice Oakley, Louisiana; Henderson Jordan, Louisiana. They arrived before dawn. They concealed themselves in the brush. They waited. At approximately 9:15 a.m., a gray 1934 Ford V8 sedan appeared. Bonnie Parker was in the passenger seat, eating a sandwich. Clyde Barrow was driving. Yvonne Methvin's truck was parked on the side of the road as planned. It appeared to have a flat tire. Clyde slowed down. The lawman opened fire without warning. No shout, no command to surrender, just gunfire. More than 130 rounds were fired in approximately 15 seconds. Bonnie and Clyde were hit multiple times. Estimates range from 25 to 50 bullet wounds each. Clyde died instantly. Bonnie may have screamed. She did not survive long. The car rolled to a stop. The lawmen approached, weapons raised. Both were dead. The lawmen searched the car. They found 3 Browning automatic rifles, 2 sawed-off shotguns, 9 semi-automatic pistols, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, stolen license plates from multiple states, clothing, canned food, and personal items. Bonnie's purse contained poems, photographs, and a small notebook. News of the ambush spread quickly. Within hours, crowds descended on the scene. Souvenir hunters swarmed the car, tearing off pieces of metal, glass, clothing. Someone tried to cut off Clyde's ear. Someone else attempted to sever his trigger finger. The lawmen had to push the crowd back. The bodies were taken to a funeral home in Arcadia, Louisiana. Thousands lined up to view them. The spectacle was grotesque. In Dallas, news of the deaths was met with relief, satisfaction, and morbid curiosity. Newspapers published graphic photographs of the bullet-riddled car, the bodies, the scene. Some celebrated. The Dallas Morning News ran the headline, "Barrow and woman are slain by officers." Others mourned, not for Bonnie and Clyde, but for what they represented. The desperation of the Depression, the failure of the system, the inevitability of violence. Bonnie's mother, Emma Parker, requested that her daughter be buried beside her. Clyde's family requested the same for him, but the families were denied a joint burial. Authorities feared it would attract crowds and create a shrine. Bonnie was buried in Dallas's Crown Hill Cemetery. Clyde was buried in Western Heights Cemetery. They were separated in death as they had never been in life. Emma Parker spent the rest of her life defending her daughter, insisting Bonnie had been led astray, that she was not a killer. It was true, but it did not matter. Bonnie Parker had chosen her path, and she had paid for it. Between 9 and 13 people are believed to have been killed in crimes associated with the Barrow Gang. Their names: John Bucher, Eugene Moore, C.G. Maxwell, Howard Hall, Doyle Johnson, Malcolm Davis, H.D. Murphy, Edward Bryant Wheeler, Henry Humphrey, Wes Harriman, Harry McGinnis, Cal Campbell, Percy Boyd, wounded, survived. Most were lawmen. Some were civilians. All had families. None became famous. They were buried, mourned privately, forgotten publicly, because the story was never about them. It was about Bonnie and Clyde. Within weeks of their deaths, Bonnie and Clyde were mythologized. Newspapers published Bonnie's poems. Magazines ran romanticized accounts of their lives. Hollywood began developing scripts. The 1967 film Bonnie and Clyde, starring Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway, cemented the legend. The film was beautiful, stylish, sympathetic. It portrayed Bonnie and Clyde as tragic figures, victims of poverty and circumstance, doomed lovers fighting an unjust system. It was fiction, but it became the dominant narrative. The myth of Bonnie and Clyde endures because it is more appealing than the truth. The truth is ugly. 2 young criminals, 13 people dead, dozens wounded, families destroyed. No political motive, no Robin Hood morality, just desperation, violence, and inevitable death. The myth is romantic. Star-crossed lovers, rebels against authority, victims of the Depression, tragic, beautiful, doomed. People prefer the myth, but the myth is a lie. The romanticization of Bonnie and Clyde erases their victims. It erases the gas station attendants who were shot for $20. It erases the lawmen who died doing their jobs. It erases the grief of the families left behind, and it distorts history. Bonnie and Clyde were not heroes. They were killers, and remembering them as heroes dishonors the dead. A A quiet cemetery in Dallas. 2 graves, miles apart. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker, 1910 to 1934. Clyde Chestnut Barrow, 1909 to 1934. Flowers on the headstones. Visitors taking photographs. The myth lives on. Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were born in Texas. They grew up in poverty during the worst economic collapse in American history. They turned to crime not because they were rebels, but because they saw no other path. And they killed 13 people in 2 years. They didn't rob banks to feed the poor. They robbed gas stations and grocery stores for pocket change. They did not fight for justice. They fought to avoid capture. They were not tragic heroes. They were desperate criminals who chose violence over surrender. And they were killed on a back road in Louisiana in an ambush without warning. It was brutal. It was inevitable. It was deserved. But within weeks, they became legends. Newspapers romanticized them. Hollywood immortalized them. The myth overtook the reality, and the victims were forgotten. Texas produced Bonnie and Clyde, but it also produced the men who stopped them. Frank Hamer and his posse did not hesitate. They did not negotiate. They did not try to arrest. They simply ended it. Because that is how the story had to end. Bonnie and Clyde are remembered because they were young, photogenic, and doomed. Their victims are forgotten because they were ordinary. This is the cost of myth. It erases truth. It glorifies violence. It rewrites killers as martyrs. Bonnie and Clyde were not symbols of resistance. They were products of desperation and violence in a broken time. And they should be remembered for what they were. 2 people who killed 13 others and died because of it. Not heroes, not lovers, just criminals. And the myth that made them famous is the lie that history must correct. If this story mattered to you, please like this video and subscribe to Texas Tales. History belongs to the truth, not the legend.